Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast, Driving Eco-Sustainability, My Perspective. And I am your host, Grace, once again. And today, just like last time, we are going to be talking about those unique climate change terms that you hear about in your day-to-day life as you go about dealing with climate change or taking climate action. And you are wondering what they mean or what they stand for. And today, we are going to be talking about mitigation and adaptation. Oftentimes you hear people talking about mitigation or adaptation in reference to response towards climate change. So what is adaptation for starters? Adaptation, as you hear the term, in layman's English, it means to adjust. So adaptation to climate change is the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate change effects in order to moderate the harm and take advantage of the beneficial opportunities, while mitigation is or are human interventions that aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and or enhance the sinks for greenhouse gases. So when it comes to adaptation, as you have noted, it will basically be about one, to adjust, secondly, to moderate harm, and thirdly, to exploit opportunities. Therefore, as you have noticed, you can either exploit opportunities within this space or you can moderate the harm caused by climate change when you decide to adapt towards climate change. And mitigation is basically reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Today, we are going to first deal with adaptation. The overall objective of adaptation is to create resilience in communities to future or anticipated climate change related disasters. So what are some of those ways in which communities can adjust to or moderate harm resulting from climate change? Firstly, in order to build resilience, communities must first understand their own needs, and this comes from observing their natural environment. So how do we do this? Firstly, there is need to assess the risks and impact of vulnerability involved. Secondly, there is need to plan for adaptation. After planning for adaptation, there is need to implement the measures that have been planned for. And lastly, there is need for constant monitoring and evaluation of measures to ensure that they are effective or to adjust and make them more effective. So what are some of those interventions that can be classed as adaptation? 1. Upgrading or installing infrastructure to protect against floods, the rise of sea levels, heat waves, or extreme heat. Also, installing early warning signs, disseminating of climate change data to assist disaster-prone communities to foresee hazards associated with change in their climate. I think we can all understand that when we were in school, we used to have a weather station that was able to tell us how hot it was going to be or how strong the winds were going to be on a daily basis. So these are some of the ways or some of the data that is disseminated in this space so that communities can easily adjust or prepare for upcoming disasters or changes in weather seasons. Another way of adapting is policy interventions. For example, there can be rules that are put in place that restrict the way constructions are put in place. Another way of adapting to climate change could be behavioral change. For example, change of diet so that we can have a sustainable diet. Also, food waste recycling and sorting. For example, we can distinguish between biodegradable waste and non-biodegradable waste so that it can easily be sorted and dealt with and recycled. Also, lowering prices of nearly expired food. This is very common in most of our supermarkets these days. Agriculture interventions like intercropping, crop rotation, or mulching that can preserve the moisture within the garden so that crops do not dry up when it's very hot or they are not destroyed during floods. Adaptation on a global stage has taken an evolution from the time when the UNFCCC was signed up to date. At least some of the key highlights in this space that I can think of are establishment of the Adaptation Committee. Now, this one was established in 2010, and its main responsibility was to promote the implementation of enhanced action on adaptation in a coherent manner as required under the convention, and it usually provides support and guidance to parties towards the preparation of their national adaptation plans to enable the parties formulate measurable national adaptation plan targets to reduce vulnerability to impacts of climate change, to also integrate adaptation into the relevant new and existing policies and activities. As you have noticed that in Article 7 of the Paris Agreement of 2015, the Global Adaptation Goal was established. Now you will notice that from the earlier international conventions concerning climate change, adaptation did not feature as much as mitigation. However, in the Paris Agreement of 2015, it established the Global Adaptation Goal, which is geared towards enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change. And this has been followed by adoption of a 2-year work program, which was adopted at COP28 in Dubai, focusing on global climate resilience. And in there, it highlights a number of targets that are supposed to be achieved towards achieving the global adaptation goal. And it also highlights its mode of assessment. So what are some of those key priority sectors that were highlighted in this work program? It focuses on water, food, agriculture, health, ecosystems and biodiversity, poverty and livelihoods, infrastructure and cultural heritage. It also underscores gender-responsive participatory and transparency approaches. So in Uganda's context, we shall notice that recently the National Adaptation Plan focusing on health was launched, and also a National Adaptation Plan was launched years ago in 2018 focusing on agriculture. And we shall notice that it highlighted some of those key stresses. I'm talking about the National Adaptation Plan in the health sector, that is the HNAP. It highlights some of the key stresses that are the source of climate change crisis in the health sector. For example, heat stress, existing of floods that result into waterborne diseases. So now that we have talked about adaptation, we shall talk about mitigation. As I mentioned, the main aim of mitigation is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or to increase the green sinks. Green sinks are forests, wetlands, all ranges of wetlands, oceans, lakes, rivers. Now that we have talked about adaptation, we are going to talk about mitigation. Now, as I mentioned earlier, mitigation aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or to increase the green sinks within our communities. And this is mainly around human interventions. These can include planting our forests, reforestation, reducing deforestation, and also restoring our wetlands. And mitigation is also one of the key areas that dominates international climate change negotiations and discussions. UNFCCC requires all parties, keeping in mind with their responsibilities and capabilities, to formulate and implement programs with measures to mitigate climate change. Developed countries have been known to come up with sector-wide caps on their national emissions, while developing countries are focused on specific programs and projects in particular sectors that can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. These are usually communicated in the nationally determined contributions submitted by each country. Now, what are some of those measures that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions? These include: 1. Shifting away from fossil fuel use, which means that there is increasing use of renewable energy. Now, renewable energy comes from the sun, from the wind, from water, and from rocks. Also, nuclear energy is also a source of renewable energy. Secondly, use of electric cars to replace petrol and diesel fuel-enabled cars and motorbikes. Another is improving energy efficiency, e.g. the use of thermal standards, better insulation and energy efficiency appliances, improving building design, transmission systems and vehicles, and also change in agricultural practices. For example, as highlighted earlier, it can be cover cropping, intercropping, crop rotation and mulching. It could also include increasing our carbon sinks, as I earlier highlighted, by preventing deforestation, restoration of our natural ecosystems by reforestation, restoring of wetlands, peatlands, grasslands, coastal ecosystem conservation like restoring the mangrove forests at the coastline. Also, policy interventions that can help limit emissions from specific sectors, for example, introducing taxes. Also, one other way can be driving less and also changing our diet. An example of the way in which Uganda has adopted this, for example, we can see that there has been an increase in the use of electric bikes and also introduction of the Kayola electric bus or buses as a mode of transportation. Also, shared transportation is being encouraged. There's also been the launch of our energy transition plan that was launched last year at COP28 that focused on utilizing the use of non-fossil fuels, especially from wind, or the sun, and from the water, and to also introduction of off-grid electricity to cater for those areas that have a problem with accessing electricity. Also, we have noticed that in Kampala there has been a launch of a car-free day by the Kampala Capital City Authority, where people are encouraged to ditch and not to use their motor vehicles and to walk, so that they can also improve their lives, but also help in reduction of emission of greenhouse gases. So we shall notice that when we are mitigating or adapting to climate change, one of the goals is also to exploit opportunities that are in this space. So we shall notice that from all these activities that I have highlighted, opportunities have arisen. For example, adaptive technologies have come into place, which has created employment for communities. And also, we shall notice that there has been an improvement in the health of our communities. We are also going to notice that because of adapting and mitigating climate change, we are also reducing our expenses. Our budget and our financial expenses are reducing. So mitigating and adapting to climate change is not only about reducing harm, but we shall notice that also opportunities are created which we can exploit. So if you want to exploit these opportunities, you will have to also equally participate in mitigating and adapting to climate change. So are you wondering what you can do towards mitigating or adapting to climate change? For example, you can engage and participate in forest planting or management. And to learn more about mitigation and adaptation, you can visit the official website of UNFCCC. I will share the link to the website in my description here below. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you can mitigate or adapt to climate change. I have been your host, Grace, and see you in the next episode.